The success of this experiment was never a given.
At a moment when American democracy can feel fragile.
We are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights.
A celebration of civic engagement on the South Side of Chicago.
Hey, people, good to see ya.
The Obama Presidential Center is finally open, and the man it is named for is ready to talk.
I am no different than you. In you, I see the same talent, the same possibility, and I want you to see it too.
His record, his dreams.
That was fantastic.
The state of our country now. Welcome to Hope Comes Home, the President Obama interview. Hello there, I'm Michelle Norris. We're glad you're here for this hour of Hope Comes Home, the President Obama interview. The Obama Presidential Center opened on June 19th. Juneteenth on the south side of Chicago. The Obamas wanted this place to be a very different experience from any other presidential library that came before it, and it is.
We designed the center not to be some lifeless mausoleum. I am too young for that. We wanted it to be a vibrant, living celebration of community where we can learn together and share the joys of art and music and sport and play. Because it's in those moments that we're reminded of our common humanity.
Already in the early days of its opening, we're seeing the effect this place has on the people who come here. The first thing you notice is joy, the kind of happiness that can be contagious. It's evident in the visitors and the employees, and the way so many people feel moved to let go and dance. Long lines to get in, line dancing outside. On the opening day, the first 100 visitors got a personal greeting from the former president and first lady. A lucky group of kids got an enthusiastic reading from one of President Obama's favorite books.
And they showed their terrible claws up. Arr.
We had a chance to spend time with President Obama in the days leading up to the opening of the new Presidential Center. It was a conversation that was personal, candid, and at times emotional. And that's not surprising, given this pivotal moment for his legacy and for the country. I've watched this campus go from dream to reality, from an interesting perch. The Obama Foundation assembled a storytelling council of historians, scholars, filmmakers, and writers. I was one of them, and as such was able to witness how the Obama team thought about how to create a space that was an incubator for leadership and civic life. Tonight, we will hear from some of the men and women who built this place from the ground up, the people who poured the concrete, planted the trees, and put the exhibits in place. It's good stuff. We're happy to have you with us, so let's go.
I am so glad that we have a chance to talk to you about this. 10 years in the making?
Yeah.
Really almost 12 now, right?
let me think. So you start thinking about this in your last year in office. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that would be 2016. So that was 10 years ago when you're starting to conceive of it. And that's when you start thinking about selecting the site and
How excited
the architects
were you
and so forth.
when you started to think about it? Was it? Some people have said it's almost, oh, now I've got to do this. It's almost like a burden. Did it feel like
it didn't
an
feel like a
opportunity for you?
burden, but it felt like a distraction because at the time you're still working on presidential stuff. Mm-hmm. So you delegate a bunch of decisions and say, I'll worry about that later. But look, it's been a long journey. You had COVID in between, which obviously threw off schedules and budgets in all kinds of ways. We literally started construction, and then suddenly COVID hits, and that changed things a lot. We're not alone in that. And the great thing about it, though, was I think there was a consistency of vision on what we were trying to accomplish with the center. That didn't vary much. Michelle and I had a very clear sense that we wanted this to be a place that would attract visitors from around the world, that would record what happened during my presidency, but that more than anything was a vital, alive, dynamic place for the South Side of Chicago and the city of Chicago, for kids in the neighborhood, that it was going to be used. And that, I think, more than anything, shaped how we thought about what this thing would end up being.
You know, I think about kids in the neighborhood. You met with a group of young black men.
Yeah.
You were seated in a circle in
Right.
room 208 of
Right.
Hyde Park Academy, right across the street
Right.
from the campus now. And it was an extraordinary conversation. You were very honest with them.
Right.
You talked about making the kind of boneheaded decisions that a lot of teenagers make.
Right.
You talked to them about experimenting with drugs. And it
Right.
was so unusual that one of the kids said, "Wait, are you talking about yourself?"
Yeah.
And out of that meeting, we know that the My Brother's Keeper initiative was one of the things that grew out of that meeting, because
Right.
later that year you announced that.
Right.
But I wonder if that meeting has lived on inside you in other ways, because it happened right across the street from where you decided to build the campus. Did that animate how you thought about the location, the design, the programming, the young people who live in an area that doesn't see this kind of shine and attention?
Well, the location, in part, was determined by the fact that this is the epicenter of my life in Chicago, right? Within a 4 or 5 mile radius of that site. I first came to Chicago. I got my first apartment there. I met my wife there. My children were born there. My wife grew up there. Our wedding reception was there. I made my announcement for my first presidential, or for my first political campaign there. I taught law school there. So, that was part of what made that site so attractive to us. But, as you say, one of the things that I learned when I moved to Chicago, and one of the things that Michelle had firsthand experience with growing up in Chicago, was even though the South Side of Chicago runs on the lakefront just like the North Side of Chicago does, for a whole bunch of historical reasons, the parks, the open spaces, the public facilities in those communities were underinvested in relative to other neighborhoods in Chicago. And so for a long time, I would drive through Lincoln Park in the north side of Chicago, and you'd look around, and there are people playing volleyball, and there are tennis courts, and there are kiosks, and there's programming, and museums, and then Jackson Park, which was just as beautiful, was empty.
Yeah.
And that sent a message. And when I was organizing and when I was serving as a state legislator, I was always shocked when you'd hear stories from kids who would say, well, I've actually never gone to the lakefront.
Even though they lived on the south side. It was right there.
They lived in Englewood, but it's just, it felt foreign to them. Much less going to the Art Institute downtown. That did not feel like it belonged to them. And so part of me having those conversations at Hyde Park Academy, the high school right across the street from where the center is going to be, is in those conversations I said, I am no different than you. That's the message I wanted to send to them. I had some good breaks. My environment was more forgiving than yours, but in you I see the same talent, the same possibility, and I want you to see it too. And so part of what I wanted the center to be is a physical manifestation of that message. I want them to start realizing, yeah, amazing art. That's part of my life. That belongs to me. The idea that, I could make my community better, my world better, and that's inside me. I want to see examples of that, and so we've already had a few of those same high school kids come in to give us a little bit of a focus group, and they seemed like they were pretty comfortable. They seemed pretty happy, and I'm hoping that continues.
Open door to them.
Open door to them.
More of our interview with President Barack Obama is coming up.
And when you and the First Lady started thinking about this, you had no idea, what would be going on in America. You have to do a little bit of sort of crystal ball thinking
Right.
as you're putting this together. How did you make sure that as you were thinking about the design and the exhibits and the message, that you were able to meet the moment?
I don't know that we were trying to prognosticate and say, all right, well, here's where things are going to be, and so we want to make sure we do this or that. The words that are wrapped around the top of
The speech from
tower
Selma, the anniversary.
is the anniversary of the Selma speech.
You are America, unconstrained by habit and convention, unencumbered by what is, because you're ready to seize what ought to be.
I've often said that may not be my very best speech, but it is most representative of what I believe. Mm-hmm. It captures my politics as well as anything. And it's been pretty consistent. This belief in an American story that begins with these amazing words, this declaration that we are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights, but it was imperfect, and then we struggled to make that ideal real. Mm-hmm. And that has always stood in opposition with a different idea of America that is based on caste and privilege and excluding people and dominating people. And those two contrasting stories about America, a lot of my speeches, a lot of my politics has been arguing this is the better story. Mm-hmm. And so I think it may seem as if right now the story told at the Presidential Center is a response to this particular moment. But actually, I think it's a response to what has always been there in America. Mm-hmm. It's that part of America that that says black people don't belong, or that says that women need to be in their place, and gay folks need to be in the closet, and poor people need to stop complaining. Because a handful of people are the ones who are creating the wealth, and they deserve to keep it. And we don't need to take care of the vulnerable, and we don't need to make public investments in our kids. That story's always been there. And I think sometimes we get confused in thinking that these two stories are completely separate. They're intertwined, right? And which is why it's possible for me to be a great admirer of George Washington and also acknowledge he was a slaveholder. Mm-hmm. And that does not negate his greatness. It simply acknowledges that there's a profound, deep flaw in these founding fathers who were also geniuses and gave us these tools, and which is true of all of us, right? It's true of every president. It's that we're this mixed bag. We got contradictions, and embody the country's contradictions, and so I do think that what's striking is right now we've got a president in the White House who seems to have embraced and embodied, in a way we haven't seen in a very long time, this other story. And maybe
Does that
that's
make your story more important and more?
I don't know if it makes it more important, but I am glad that we are planting a flag, that we are hopefully creating a repository, a vessel through which people can be reminded of this better story. Now, I think ultimately, a museum, a presidential center, even one that is, engaging in ongoing work, doesn't replace actual activism. It doesn't. The best reminder of our best story is what happened in your hometown in Minneapolis a while back, of neighbors looking after neighbors. The best reminder is when you see folks around the country who are looking out for each other and fighting the good fight to, make sure that people have health care, make sure that opportunity is fairly shared. Maybe a way to think about the Presidential Center and what at least we tried to create is some touchstones, some markers, some tools for people to just be reminded of. Oh yeah, this is what our democracy is. This is who we are.
The idea of these two stories is interesting because America has been having an argument with itself.
Right.
We say one thing
Yeah.
in our founding documents. We do something quite different in the way that we construct society.
Right.
And the argument that you're talking about and the stories that you're talking about, the exclusion of people of color, the exclusion of black people, the exclusion of women, the exclusion, the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Yeah.
These are things that we know are true to the American story, but they don't always appear in presidential libraries.
Yeah.
Presidential libraries are usually shrines to a single man or a single administration, men, because all of our presidents have been men so far. You decided to travel a different path. You decided to tell a different story in a different way so that you lean into that sort of thorny terrain around the founding contradictions.
Right.
What was the thought process that led you there? And was there anyone that pushed back and tried to say, maybe we want to do this in a more traditional way? Because that is unusual.
Well, yeah. For folks who come to visit, the first thing they'll actually see is in the museum is a copy of the Declaration of Independence and a pretty long description and displays of the struggle to realize that ideal that's embodied in the Declaration. But hopefully what they'll also see, even when the exhibits are about my presidency, that there were people who disagreed with what I did. That there was a lot of unfinished business in my presidency.
And you talk about that.
And that there was something like the Tea Party that emerges during my presidency, and it's useful for people to understand where does that come from. And look, it's the Obama Presidential Center. It's the Obama Museum is a tribute to my presidency. Frankly, I would probably have had even less of me. Maybe this is the academic in me that is more interested in folks getting a sense of history more broadly, and my presidency is just a chapter in that. This is like the civic teacher nerd in me. But I do think it's important to ground what happened during my presidency in this broader sweep of American history. And as I said before, this idea that on the right, and you see this in the Trump administration, this idea that any suggestion or criticism that America was anything other than perfect is unpatriotic.
Is a suggestion that you hate your country.
Is a suggestion that you hate your country. Now, the flip side is, among progressives, sometimes there is this sense of, well, the only true narrative of America is this one of oppression and exclusion. And I reject both those views. I think it's complicated. As I said, I think it's possible to celebrate the founders and appreciate what they did, as well as look objectively and critically at how their values strayed very far from what they professed. I think it's possible to say that there were populists in rural America and the South and white America that really did believe in equality and justice, for white folks, and helped to make progress in giving more people opportunity, and not ignore the fact that that was to the exclusion of others. And that's the kind of complexity that I hope people get a little bit of a sense of.
You want people to actually marinate in that when they visit your center.
And the reason is this, because I think when you understand the complexities of America and the contradictions of America, I don't think it makes you love it less. I think it makes you love it more. And I think it also makes you more resilient, because then during periods like we're in right now, where for a lot of folks it's crazy and you feel despair and anger, that perspective allows you to then say, okay, we've gone through crazy periods like this before. We've gone through mean periods before. It fortifies you to say that, yes, this has been part of the journey that we're on.
We've been here before.
And
we can do it again.
There's no reason to suggest that we can't get through this one either.
We'll be right back. At the very top of the Obama Presidential Center, wrapping around the corner of the building, you can see it there, are letters, giant letters spelling out a portion of the speech President Obama delivered on the 50th anniversary of the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. President Obama told us that he thinks it's not necessarily his best speech, but it is the one that best represents his political philosophy. He believes the most powerful word in our democracy is we.
We the people, we shall overcome. Yes, we can. That word is owned by no one. It belongs to everyone.
Each letter in the text from that speech on the building is 5 feet tall, made of concrete, hoisted into place by heavy machinery, and installed by some of the skilled tradesmen and women who built this place. And the folks that built this place, they are a proud bunch. Before the center opened to the public, I sat down with 3 members of the construction crew.
My name is Moises Rocha. I'm a labor foreman for Lakeside Alliance.
I'm Shelly Ryan. I'm a general superintendent, so I'm in charge of all the landscaping on the project.
I'm Louis DeJohn, a local 10 carpenter. I helped the You Are America speech. I helped cast it in concrete.
There's a portion of President Obama's speech at the 50th anniversary of the march on Selma, March Across the Bridge in Selma, that is on the south and the west side of the building. And it is a section of that speech, and you worked on the letters.
Every single one.
How big are those letters?
54 inches by 45 inches. We were given a template. Every week we pulled letters. They gave us a letter list. We leveled everything and poured the concrete, cast it, demolded it, lifted it, rigged it, put it on a truck, and set it out in the parking lot. Every week was a Scrabble game. We need 4 S's, we need 4 N's, we need 7 T's, so it was like that. I'm proud of it. First black president, and I'm from the South Side, and I got in and got on, and amazing, just seeing everything full circle, just wow.
People who will be watching this will see it all over the country, all over the world, and they will eventually make their way here. What is the one thing that you want them to see if they've met you now? What should they look for when they actually come here to see a little bit of you?
I got a few areas. I got stuck at the parking garage crane, lost a boot.
You lost a boot?
I lost a boot. Because when you dig down, you got clay. Clay goes up to your foot. You won't pull it. You're not pulling your foot.
Wait,
out.
your boot is still in the building?
Yeah.
One of your boots is in the building?
Yeah. I had to lean on top of the bucket, and the bucket had to carry me, pull me out, and I boot left in there.
I'm glad you still have your foot.
Oh no, it's just the boot. It's just the boot.
Okay, so your boot is you've
My
got a
boot's
you,
right
you've
there
got
in that
you've left a
parking
forever
garage.
mark on this building. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're parking in the parking garage,
I got. There's a boot in the parking garage. It's mine.
did this project ask a lot of you? It's a big project. It is unusual in its architecture. The letters, the shape of the building, the kind of granite that was used. Was it a difficult construction project?
Yeah, a lot of hours here, a lot of time spent away from home, from friends, from family. But you're going to be able to come back here and show everybody for the rest of our lives that we built this. So yeah, it did ask a lot. The details are level of detail I've never had before, right? So the learning opportunities there are incredible. And yeah, I think that while it has been a lot of work and hard work and long hours, I think a lot of us feel that it's worth it to be able to have this sort of feather in our cap.
An observation.
Yeah,
The construction crews here are very representative.
yeah,
You see people of color,
yep.
you see women, you see people who are older and people who are younger. That seems to be a little bit unusual in construction sites.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you were part of a program that made sure that people from the community could be part of this project.
Definitely.
And you called yourself a dinosaur?
Apprentice carpenter. I got into carpentry and got into the trades late in life. So my focus is different. I got on this job, and in my interview process, the contractor in South Bend who was talking about the job, what sold me was when he said, most buildings are built to last 100 years. He said, what you're about to work on is going to be here as long as there's an America. That encapsulated time for me. And I was like, I'm about to get on this job, and I'm gonna do it.
Hope comes home. The President Obama interview continues after this.
Let me ask you about the neighborhood. It's in the south side,
Yeah.
on the south side, on Stony Island,
Right.
a street that is too often in the news for sometimes the wrong reasons.
Right.
What does it mean to place this center in a place that doesn't usually see this kind of investment?
Well, part of what we wanted to do is to recognize this is a big investment, and it can potentially help anchor and catalyze economic development and opportunities for communities that oftentimes have been left behind. Now,
Are you worried about displacement, though? I mean,
Well,
Airbnb rates are going up, rents are going up. You know, do you have a plan to monitor or mitigate that the kinds of things that can happen with gentrification?
Well, look, this is always going to be, nobody's figured out this solution, right, perfectly, which is, hey, these communities are underinvested in and they're poor and there aren't enough businesses and opportunities. And then people make investments in their businesses and opportunities. Hey, wait a minute, rents are going up and the tax base is going up and Airbnb rates go up. There's no way to make massive investments, bring about, a bunch of tourism dollars and, create greater interest and beautify communities and not also see some values rise. That's part of the purpose of it. The question is always, from our perspective, are we making sure that the people who are already there can get a piece of that rising tide? Can they access those opportunities, which is why, in terms of employment at the Presidential Center, one of our biggest priorities was making sure that folks were able to not just apply for jobs, but actually get jobs and get trained for jobs. The young people who are living in those communities, are they going to be able to get internships and fellowships? And we're exposing them to the work that's being done and what opportunities they have as a consequence. The vendors, the cleaning crews, the contractors, all those folks, we've been very systematic about working with community groups in those communities and saying to them, this is yours, not just ours, and we want you to be a part of this. And I think there will, over time, be the kind of community improvement that is not just bringing in people from the outside, but also lifting up folks from the inside. That's our hope.
That's the hope. Okay. I want to do a speed round.
Okay.
I want to pepper you with a few questions that will allow us to go inside the museum itself.
Okay.
I've heard that you've tested every chair in the building.
I'm not sure I've tested every chair, but I've tested a lot of them.
I just have this image of you running around sitting in all the chairs.
You know what? I'm a big believer in like stuff being comfortable. Because so much of the stuff inside is beautifully designed and meticulous and all this. My attitude was, yeah, but if a young mom with 3 kids that she's been dragging around through this museum and her feet hurt and she now is sitting down, is it comfortable? No matter how pretty it is, is she getting a break?
Were any of the chairs replaced?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Well,
okay.
I'm not going to say who, but there were a couple where I was all like, this looks great until you sit in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a hidden jewel in the museum, almost like an Easter egg, that you worry people will miss? Something that you're really proud of, but you're afraid that people
This
won't
is
notice
actually not a hidden jewel. It is, but people may miss it. There is an entire room, a display that we're calling Democracy 101. That is away from some of the flashier,
It's kind of in a corner.
Oval Office. It's in a corner, and it just gives people sort of a primer on the Constitution and the First Amendment, and I'm really proud of that. I'm hoping people go through that because I think I worked pretty closely with the exhibit designers in creating a space where a layperson who's not, studying this stuff all the time can just kind of go in and get a sense of, all right, I have a pretty good idea about what all these arguments are about. And I'm hoping that especially kids, but adults as well, take that in because I think it's done really well.
Now that you've said it, I think people are actually going to look for it. What is the piece of art that just knocks you out every time you see it?
I mean, I'm a little biased because he's a friend of mine, but Mark Bradford's piece that essentially ascends from the bottom of the museum tower about 3-4 stories when you factor in how high each story is magnificent, and it depicts Chicago and in fact the very portion of Chicago in which the center is situated in an imaginative, abstract way. It's spectacular. But look, all of the art is hard to beat.
That was an unfair question.
It was a very unfair question because
but
now I'm starting to think about Julie Moretto's stained glass on the other side of the building. Some of the pieces that have just recently been put in. I'm going to stop naming them because if I leave somebody out, people are going to feel neglected.
That's actually probably smart, diplomatic move. Yeah. There is a restaurant on site
Yes.
named for Tafari Campbell.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Who you knew.
Well, yes, I knew, and miss him dearly.
Yes.
Wonderful person who was your personal chef for many years. Man, could he cook.
He could.
I mean, he
was the best.
He was special.
Yeah.
And there is a restaurant that serves wonderful food. What is your favorite dish at Tafari's Kitchen?
I have to say, it's actually the chili. I can't give Tafari credit for this one because this is based on my own chili recipe,
Oh, wait,
so I
wait.
may be a little bit
I
biased.
mean, people are like, wait, he cooks?
Well, not anymore.
Okay.
But there was a time, and it's pretty good chili.
Really?
With some cornbread with it,
Okay, all right.
I give it 2 thumbs up.
Okay, what kind of beans do you use?
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna let you go ahead.
Okay, you have to try it.
Traditionally, I'm a kidney bean guy, but check it out.
Okay.
See what you think.
I will do that. Favorite book in the new library?
Must be Becoming.
Smart answer.
What are you talking about?
Of course, of course. Critics have called the Affordable Care Act Obamacare, and it was meant to be a sort of derisive name, and you embraced it. Yeah, I did that. And
Absolutely.
so they're calling this the main building the Obamalist. Will you embrace that too?
Absolutely, that's fine. I think that what I'm interested in is seeing how people respond when they visit. I appreciate architecture enough to know that it'll be 20 years before we have a sense of how the architecture fits into people's imaginations and how whether it lasts or not. But what you can know right away is the people enjoy being there, right? And if, as it seems so far, they do, if people feel excited by the space and inspired by the space, and it's usable and it's fun, and kids are in the playground, and folks who are going through the museum are absorbing good energy and feel like, you know what, maybe I can go out there and do something too. And they get to the Sky Room and they look around and see a panorama of Chicago and their own neighborhood that they've never seen before. And community groups are having meetings there, and folks are using the recording studio to film their own podcasts or make their own videos, and kids are sitting in that public library and reading and excited about reading. If all that stuff's happening, then we will have achieved what we were trying to achieve.
More of our interview with President Barack Obama after this brief break.
You've been through the campus many times. What's the exhibit that still gets you every single time?
I've talked about this. Right outside the Oval Office, we have a display of a sampling of the 10 letters that I used to receive every night. I think we got something like 40,000 pieces of correspondence every day.
Every day?
For 8 years while I was in the White House. And we had an entire letter correspondence office just responding to the public's letters. And that office would select 10 representative letters for me to read each day. They'd put it in my folder at the top of my briefing book, and I'd usually save those for after I was finished with reading all the stuff I had to read. And I initiated that as a way of staying in touch with people, especially early on when we were going through so many difficult decisions. And so there's a display that has a sampling of those letters, but the exhibition team made this wonderful short video, this vignette of a few of those letters, and whenever I watch those, because it's mother talking about, Mr. President, I'm struggling, and it's a vet, who's still trying to find his path after he's no longer serving.
Dear Mr. President, Sir, I was injured in Afghanistan in 2011. It's a funny thing, fear. I wasn't afraid in Afghanistan, but I am horrified at the thought of my future. Sir, all my life I've tried to find what a good man is and be that man. I am truly lost.
Patrick, thank you for your thoughtful letter, and more importantly, for your service and sacrifice. I can tell from your letter you are already a good man. People are really raw in their emotions in some of these letters, partly because they don't expect the president's actually going to read it. It's almost like a meditation for them, a way of getting stuff off their chest. And so whenever I watch that, I get kind of...
Yeah, I can see that. You get.
I get choked up.
You're getting a little
Yeah. So
choked up now.
if there's one exhibit that people should take the time right after the Oval Office, which everybody will go to just so they can take a picture of the apples and everything else that might be in there.
Sit in your chair.
Sit in the chair. Just come around on the side, and there'll be those letters, and there will be a video that's looping, and take the time to watch that, because I think that, as much as anything, captures what I always hoped the spirit of my presidency was.
And the spirit of your presidency was?
A sense of generosity towards each other, a sense of that everybody counts and everybody matters, and that when we act on that basic presumption, when we extend grace to each other, when we're willing to fight for that idea without sacrificing a recognition of the humanity of those that we're fighting against. If we can manage that, even if it's messy and not always perfect, then I think this country does well and the world does better.
Thank you so much for being here for Hope Comes Home, the President Obama interview. If you want to learn more about the Obama Presidential Center and get an exclusive look at the museum and the grounds, you will want to see our 2-hour special program, and you can find it online at ms.now/HopeComesHome. I'm just going to repeat that for you. That's ms.now/HopeComesHome. Take care and have a good night.